Welcome, dear listener, to Whispers of the Night, a place where stories unfold like dreams, and every word guides you gently toward rest. Tonight, we'll wander into a tale filled with mystery, memory, and moonlight. Our story is called The Secret Drawer of Midnight Letters. It begins in the quiet hush of an attic, where shadows are deep and silence feels alive. There, a young boy named Julian discovers something extraordinary: an old desk with a drawer that refuses to open by day, but whispers secrets when the clock nears midnight. Before we step into the attic together, take a moment to settle in. Let your body sink into comfort, knowing this time is yours. A safe pause before the rhythm of sleep carries you away. And if you enjoy these nightly journeys, I invite you to follow Whispers of the Night by subscribing. You'll never miss a story, and every evening you'll have a gentle place to return to, where the world grows quieter and your heart lighter. Now, let's begin to unwind and prepare for the story, letting calm surround us like a soft blanket of twilight. Before we enter Julian's story, let's take these next few minutes to gently prepare the mind and body for rest. This is your time to soften, to unwind, and to let go of the day. Start by finding a position that feels absolutely comfortable. Allow yourself to settle deeper into the surface beneath you. Let gravity take its hold, supporting you completely so you don't have to carry anything at all. Take a slow, deep breath in through your nose. Hold for a moment. Again breathe in, filling your chest, your ribs, your belly, and breathe out, letting go of any tension you might still be holding. Now, bring your awareness to your body, gently scanning from the top of your head down to your toes. Notice your forehead and soften it, as if smoothing away every line. Let your eyes feel heavy, lids relaxed, as though twilight itself is cradling them. Unclench your jaw, letting it loosen, and let your tongue rest gently against the roof of your mouth. Move down to your shoulders. Imagine them melting, dropping away from your ears as though a weight has been lifted. Let this feeling of ease trickle down into your arms, your elbows, your wrists, and into your hands. Your fingers relax, no longer gripping or holding, simply resting. Your breath continues slow and calm. Each inhale brings peace. Each exhale releases the day. Now bring awareness to your chest and your heart. Feel its steady rhythm, quiet and constant, a reminder of safety and life. Let your belly soften. No need to hold it tight. Release all effort as your hips sink deeper, your legs stretching out heavy and still. From your thighs to your knees, from your calves to your ankles, all the way to your toes, your body rests in complete stillness. Imagine now that you are lying on the attic floor beside Julian's grandmother's desk. Above you, the beams of the ceiling creak gently with age, holding centuries of memory. Moonlight slips through a small window, cool and silver, brushing your skin with its soft glow. The air smells faintly of cedarwood, parchment, and time itself. With each breath, you notice the quiet around you. A candle flickers beside the desk, its flame moving slowly, steady and warm. The shadows dance across the wood, and you feel safe in their embrace. The locked drawer glimmers faintly. Though unopened, it hums with a presence, as though waiting for your stillness, your calm, your listening heart. Picture yourself reaching out, not to pull it open, but simply to rest your fingertips along the smooth surface of the desk. It feels cool, grounding, real. You sense the history beneath your hand, stories pressed into the wood grain, stories waiting for the right moment to rise. Now, imagine the drawer glowing faintly brighter, as if recognizing your calm. You don't need to rush. You don't need to know what waits inside. The story is patient, the secrets gentle. All you need to do is rest. Take another long inhale and a soft, slow exhale. With every breath, your body becomes lighter, as if you are sinking into the floorboards and at the same time floating above them. Safe, weightless, at peace. Let the silence of the attic wrap around you. The world outside is far away now, softened and blurred. Only this moment remains your breath, your stillness, the faint glow of the drawer, and the steady rhythm of your heart. With each passing second, you are drifting closer to sleep. The story will carry you there, guiding you softly, like a hand through moonlight. You are ready now, ready to follow Julian into the midnight hour, where the drawer will finally open and where the letters begin. The secret drawer of midnight letters. The locked drawer. Julian had always been drawn to forgotten places, the sort of corners where dust collected in thick velvet layers, and the silence seemed older than memory itself. The attic of his grandmother's house was one of those places. Its narrow staircase creaked underfoot as he climbed, and the air carried the faint, warm scent of aged wood and forgotten fabric. Beams of moonlight spilled through a small, circular window, illuminating motes of dust that danced lazily in the quiet. He had visited his grandmother many times before, but never had he been allowed, or perhaps never had he felt compelled to explore this uppermost chamber. The attic seemed like a world suspended in time. Boxes lined the walls, stacked in uneven towers, their surfaces coated with a thin layer of dust. A collection of antique trunks, some faded and cracked, others surprisingly polished, hinted at decades of family history. There were portraits to ancestors who seemed to watch him as he moved among the stacks. Their eyes, painted with meticulous care, followed him, reflecting an expression somewhere between curiosity and warning. It was in the far corner of the room, tucked beneath the sloping ceiling, that he noticed it, an old desk, its surface worn and varnished unevenly over the years. The wood was dark, almost black, under the soft silver of moonlight, with intricate carvings along its edges swirling patterns that seemed to suggest stories untold. Each curve of the carved patterns whispered of patience and care, of a time when craftsmen spent months perfecting a single piece. Julian ran his fingers along the grooves, feeling the texture, imagining the hands that had carved them so many years ago. Drawers lined the front of the desk, each one polished smooth from years of careful use. The top drawer, however, resisted his touch. He pressed the small brass handle, wiggled it, even tapped it gently with his knuckles, but it refused to give way. It was as if the drawer had absorbed the years of solitude in the attic, becoming a guardian of secrets that were not meant to be disturbed. Grandma never mentioned this, Julian murmured to himself. His voice sounded oddly loud in the stillness, echoing slightly off the wooden beams. Why would she hide it or lock it so carefully? He tried to peer through the tiny gap between the drawer and the desk's frame, but it was impossible to see inside. The air that seeped from the narrow edges smelled faintly of parchment and ink, a combination that seemed to promise stories yet untold. Julian felt a shiver of anticipation. There was something unusual about the desk, a strange energy that seemed to hum beneath its polished surface. It was as if the furniture itself had been waiting for someone like him to notice. As he sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, Julian studied the desk. Around him, the attic seemed to grow quieter, the kind of quiet that presses against the ears until even the smallest sounds become startling. He listened intently. For a moment, there was nothing but the faint scratching of a loose shutter in the wind outside. Then, almost imperceptibly, he thought he heard a faint rustling coming from the locked drawer. It was so subtle that he questioned himself. Perhaps it was the wind, perhaps the settling of the house. Yet his pulse quickened as he strained to hear more. Night had deepened outside the small circular window. The moon hung low, casting a silver glow that shifted the shapes of boxes and trunks into strange, elongated shadows. Julian could feel the attic holding its breath, the air thick with anticipation. The rustling sound came again, slightly louder, a gentle scraping, as if something within the drawer was moving, waiting. He leaned closer, pressing his ear against the cool wood. The sound was unmistakable, now a faint shuffling, almost like the brushing of paper against wood. Julian pulled back, startled. He swallowed hard. His hands shook as he gripped the edge of the desk. "No, this can't be," he whispered. Rational thought told him that drawers didn't move on their own, that desks didn't rustle in the quiet of the night. Yet every instinct in his body was telling him otherwise. He felt a magnetic pull toward the locked drawer, an inexplicable urgency that made him both anxious and excited. He sat back on the floor, trying to calm himself. He remembered the stories his grandmother used to tell him when he was small, tales of secret letters, hidden messages, and objects imbued with mysterious power. Could it be that the drawer contained something like that? Something old, something meant for discovery only at the right time. The idea sent a thrill through him, an unspoken promise of adventure hidden within the folds of the night. Julian glanced around the attic, the shadows now seeming deeper, almost tangible. The trunks and boxes appeared more like guardians of secrets than mere storage containers. He realized that this attic, usually so familiar in his memory, had transformed into a place of possibility. The desk was no longer just a piece of furniture. It was a threshold, a boundary between the mundane and the extraordinary. He crouched and ran his fingers along the brass handle once more, this time pressing harder, as if sheer determination could coax it open. The handle didn't budge, but he noticed a tiny keyhole beneath it. He hadn't seen it before. Dust coated the edges, but the metal gleamed faintly in the moonlight. Julian's heart raced. Keys had always fascinated him, especially old ones that seemed designed for secrecy. He wondered if his grandmother had a key, perhaps hidden somewhere in the house. But the thought of waiting for her next visit seemed unbearable. Curiosity clawed at him, stronger than caution. He examined the desk more closely, searching for clues. There were scratches near the edges, faint markings that might have been used to manipulate a hidden mechanism. There was a faint indentation on one corner of the desk, shaped almost like a miniature letter. He traced it with his fingertip, imagining how it might interact with a secret key or latch. Each moment spent investigating deepened his sense of connection to the drawer, as if he were communicating silently with something locked inside. Time slipped by unnoticed. Julian became so absorbed in the desk that he barely registered the change in the attic's atmosphere. The air grew colder, carrying with it the faint scent of old paper ink. And something else. He couldn't identify, a scent that seemed almost alive, almost sentient. Shadows flickered across the walls, elongated and twisted, as though they were reacting to his presence. The rustling sound returned, now almost rhythmic, like the scratching of a quill across parchment. Julian's imagination raced. He pictured a letter, or a collection of letters, perhaps tied with ribbon, each one containing a story from a time long past. Perhaps the drawer held memories of his grandmother's youth, or messages intended for someone she loved but could never reach. The thought made him ache with anticipation. What secrets could be so carefully hidden in a drawer that refused to open? What stories had waited decades for a hand brave enough to uncover them? As the clock in the house struck 11, Julian reluctantly left the attic, his curiosity still unquenched. He descended the narrow staircase slowly, his footsteps echoing against the walls. In the quiet of his bedroom, he lay awake, eyes tracing the patterns of shadows cast by the moonlight on his walls. The memory of the desk lingered in his mind like a whisper, a promise of something waiting just beyond reach. He tried to sleep, but the image of the locked drawer haunted him. What had caused the rustling? Was it merely the wind, or something else, something that had been waiting all these years for someone to notice? He imagined the drawer opening on its own, spilling letters or journals, revealing mysteries that might alter his understanding of his grandmother or even himself. Each imagined story made his heart beat faster, and each imagined revelation made sleep impossible. The night passed slowly, filled with the half-dreams of a mind unable to let go of a mystery. Shadows played tricks on his eyes, and the wind whispered secrets that seemed almost audible. Julian's dreams were haunted by the desk, by its polished surface, the brass handle, and the keyhole that promised answers. Figures moved in the shadows of the attic, almost human, almost familiar, guiding him toward the drawer. He awoke multiple times, each awakening bringing the same thought. He needed to return to the attic, to uncover the secret that waited behind that stubborn brass handle. Finally, just before midnight, Julian could resist no longer. He rose from his bed, careful not to wake his parents, and made his way back up the narrow staircase. The attic greeted him as though it had been expecting him, its shadows deeper, its air charged with a quiet energy. He approached the desk slowly, the moonlight reflecting off the worn wood, casting patterns that danced across the floor. He pressed his ear against the locked drawer, holding his breath. The rustling was unmistakable now, a gentle shuffle that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. His hand trembled as he reached for the brass handle, and then, as the clock in the house ticked toward midnight, he felt it as subtle vibration, almost imperceptible, coming from within the drawer. It was as though something inside was aware of his presence, waiting for the precise moment to reveal itself. Julian's heart pounded. He knew instinctively that this was the beginning of something far greater than curiosity, far greater than a simple exploration of an attic. Something in the drawer had been waiting for him, and he could feel its anticipation mirrored in his own. The world outside, the mundane, ordinary world, seemed to fade. There was only the desk, the locked drawer, and the promise of secrets long kept, now stirring into life. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. The rustling grew louder, more urgent, yet still delicate, like the whisper of a quill over paper. Julian's hand hovered over the keyhole, but he had no key. Yet some part of him apart he did not fully understand knew that the key would come, or that the drawer might open by itself. The thought should have frightened him, but instead it filled him with an almost holy reverence. He could sense that he was on the verge of discovering something that had waited, patient and silent, for decades. Julian stepped back slightly, eyes wide, ears straining to catch every sound. The rustling intensified, brushing against the wood, echoing softly in the enclosed space. It was then, in the quiet of the attic, at the stroke of midnight, that Julian understood something profound. This was no ordinary desk, and no ordinary drawer. It was a portal to the past, a guardian of stories, and he had been chosen, by fate, or by some quiet, mysterious force, to be its witness. He stood there, breathless, heart hammering, the cool air of the attic brushing against his skin. And in that moment, he realized that nothing would ever be the same. The locked drawer, with its secret rustlings and hidden contents, had awakened. It had called to him across the decades, and he had answered. The night stretched on, thick with anticipation, and Julian felt the first stirrings of a journey he had not yet begun, but could already feel deep within his bones. He was no longer merely a visitor to his grandmother's attic. He was a participant in a story that had been waiting, silent and patient, for him to arrive. The letter with no name. The moment the clock struck midnight, the attic seemed to hold its breath. Julian, heart pounding, returned to the desk, the silver glow of the moonlight pooling around him in soft, pale sheets. The faint rustling that had haunted him all evening intensified, a delicate scraping that made his skin tingle. He placed his trembling hand on the brass handle of the top drawer, and with the smallest push, it responded. Inch by inch, the drawer creaked open, as though reluctant to reveal its secret, but ultimately unable to resist the pull of curiosity. Inside rested a single letter, lying flat against the dark wood. The paper was delicate, almost translucent in the moonlight, with edges slightly curled, as though aged by time itself. It smelled faintly of lavender and old ink, a scent that immediately drew Julian in, filling him with a strange sense of calm mixed with anticipation. The letter was tied with a narrow ribbon of deep crimson, frayed at the ends, and the ribbon seemed almost to pulse in the dim light, as if alive. He lifted the letter slowly, careful not to disturb it too abruptly, as though any sudden movement might shatter the fragile spell that hung over the attic. The handwriting on the envelope was graceful, looping, and precise, yet carried an odd, almost lyrical quality. It was addressed simply to the one who listens. No signature, no return address, not even a date. Just those 4 words, written with ink that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Julian's pulse quickened. The handwriting was familiar, yet alien. It stirred a strange recognition deep within him, as if he had always known this letter would find him. He untied the ribbon, careful not to tear the fragile paper. The rustling sound came again, gentler this time, almost like the letter itself was whispering, urging him to read. He unfolded the paper and felt the smoothness of the aged surface beneath his fingers, the subtle ridges of ink, the faint indentation of a pen pressed carefully into the fiber. The words on the page seemed simple at first, yet each line was imbued with quiet, deliberate power. To the one who listens, you have found me, or perhaps I have found you. Somewhere in the quiet of the night, you will hear me. You will know me by the rustle of words that have been waiting, patient and still, for a hand willing to read them. Julian paused, breathless. The letter spoke directly to him, yet in a way that suggested it had waited for decades, perhaps centuries, to be read by the right person. The phrasing, the rhythm, the care of the words, they all hinted at an intelligence, an awareness behind the pen. He felt a shiver run down his spine. I have stories to tell, but not all at once. Some must unfold slowly, like the petals of a flower under the careful gaze of dawn. Others are heavier, cloaked in shadow, and must be approached with patience. Listen well. listen closely, and you may discover the truths that have been hidden in the spaces between heartbeats. Julian's hands shook as he held the letter. He glanced around the attic, the shadows stretching and shifting as if in response to the words he read. The moonlight glinted off the brass handle of the desk, highlighting the intricate carvings that now seemed less decorative and more like subtle signs, markings left to guide him. It was as if the entire room had become a vessel for the letter, a stage set to heighten its message. Do not be afraid. Fear is the shadow that clouds the path of those who listen, who seek only to understand. You are chosen, in a sense, though not by me, nor by anyone else. The world has its ways of selecting its witnesses, and tonight, at this hour, you have been chosen. Julian's pulse raced. Chosen, the word hummed in his mind, resonating with something deeper than curiosity. It was an acknowledgement, a recognition that he did not fully understand. But even as excitement surged, a thread of anxiety wound through him. What exactly had he been chosen for? And why did the letter feel as though it had known him, known his thoughts, before he had even returned to the attic? The next lines were written more faintly, almost as if the ink had been pressed with less certainty, or perhaps intentionally made to fade. There are things you will not understand at first. Some truths are like mirrors, reflecting only what is ready to be seen. Others will demand patience, careful listening, and a willingness to walk in silence, even when the world outside calls with noise and distraction. Do not rush. Do not force what is not ready to reveal itself. Julian leaned back against the attic wall, letting the letter rest on his knees. He could feel the weight of it not in pounds or ounces, but in significance, as if the paper carried not just words, but intention, memory, and a kind of quiet urgency. The attic, too, seemed alive in response. Shadows stretched further, creaking wood whispered beneath his fingertips, and the faint rustling that had haunted him for hours now felt like a heartbeat, synchronized with his own. He read on. I will speak to you through these pages. My voice is not loud, but it exists in every pause, every space between lines. Listen not only with your eyes, but with your mind, your heart, and your soul. Only then will you hear me truly. Julian closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in. The attic had become more than just a room. It was a sanctuary, a threshold between the known and the mysterious. The letter was more than paper, it was a doorway. He could feel the tug of something vast and unseen, stretching across time and space, reaching out to connect with him. The sensation was both thrilling and terrifying. Tonight, you have heard me. In the days to come, you will see me again, in fragments, in whispers, in hidden places. Each revelation will build upon the last, leading you along a path that is yours to walk alone, but never without guidance. There is a story, waiting one, that belongs to the world, yet has been waiting for someone like you to uncover it. Julian's breath caught. The letter suggested that there was more, but not all at once. It promised a journey, one that would require patience, courage, and, above all, listening. He felt a thrill of anticipation, a mixture of fear and excitement. Knowing that the drawer and the letter were the beginning of something extraordinary, he looked back at the envelope. The words "to the one who listens" seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, as if affirming that the letter had chosen him for a reason. He could not explain why he felt so certain, yet he did. The feeling was absolute, as if his entire being had been attuned for this single moment. Julian carefully refolded the letter, returning it to the drawer. He hesitated before closing it, running his fingers over the polished wood one last time. The rustling sound returned, almost like a sigh, a gentle exhalation of relief or anticipation. It was as though the drawer itself had acknowledged his careful handling and was content, for now, to remain closed. He lingered in the attic for a long time afterward, the letter resting in the drawer like a silent promise. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the moon traced its slow path across the sky. The world seemed ordinary, yet Julian knew that ordinary had been transformed. The letter had awakened something within him, an awareness, a curiosity, a readiness to listen. As he descended the narrow staircase, his mind swirled with questions. Who had written the letter? How had it ended up in the attic? What stories had been waiting for him all this time? The house, silent and ancient, seemed to hold its breath alongside him, as if aware that something remarkable had begun in his room. Julian placed the key thoughts into words in his mind: patience, listening, quiet, fragments. Each one felt like a piece of a larger puzzle, a guide for what was to come. The letters, words resonated deeply, leaving him with a sense of purpose that he could not yet fully articulate. He felt as if a door had been opened, not just in the attic, not just in the desk, but within himself. He could not sleep. He lay awake, eyes tracing the shadows cast by the moonlight, imagining the letter resting quietly in the drawer, waiting for him to return. Each creak of the old house, each whisper of wind, seemed to echo the promise contained within the fragile paper. Julian knew that the world beyond the attic could not yet comprehend what had begun here. In the quiet hours of midnight, the letter had spoken to him, and he had listened. That alone was enough to change everything. And as the first hints of dawn brushed against the horizon, Julian understood one immutable truth: the journey had begun. The letter with no name had chosen him, and he would answer its call, no matter where it led. For in the spaces between words, in the silence that followed each line, Julian had found a voice that was not his own, yet somehow deeply familiar. It whispered of stories, secrets, and truths that had waited patiently for someone who could truly hear them. And Julian knew with an unshakable certainty that he was ready. Messages in Moonlight. The attic had become a place of anticipation. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the house was swallowed by shadows. Julian's mind would drift back to the locked drawer, the letter, and the promise of something extraordinary waiting to be revealed. By day, the world seemed mundane to Smotes, dancing lazily in golden sunlight. The distant hum of neighbors, the scent of old books and polished wood. But by night, the attic transformed. Moonlight poured through the small circular window, turning the space into a silvered sanctuary where shadows shifted and whispered. It was on the second night after discovering the first letter that Julian returned to the desk. The drawer, which had resisted him so stubbornly just days before, now seemed almost eager to open. It slid outward with a soft, musical creak, as if welcoming him back. Inside lay another letter, identical in size and paper, tied with the same deep crimson ribbon. Julian's hands shook as he lifted it. The envelope was addressed again to the one who listens. No signature, no clue to its author, only the same delicate handwriting that seemed to ripple with life in the moonlight. He untied the ribbon and unfolded the paper, expecting words as simple as the first letter, but what he found was far stranger. By the dim light of the moon, the ink shimmered and shifted across the page. At first, it appeared to be a mundane note, scribbled in graceful cursive. The key to memory is in the corners where shadows linger. Julian frowned. Shadows lingered in corners, all over the attic. Could it be a riddle? A clue to something hidden? He felt the familiar tingle of anticipation, the thrill of discovery rising in his chest. He set the letter down and moved toward the far corner of the attic. The moonlight pooled against the slanted wall, illuminating a stack of old trunks, their surfaces worn by time. Julian's eyes traced the edges, searching for anything that could be considered a key. And then he noticed it, a small, triangular indentation in the wood, barely perceptible except for the way moonlight caught its edge. With trembling fingers, he pressed it. There was a soft click. The trunk lid lifted, revealing an assortment of old objects, photographs yellowed with age, a tangle of ribbons, a small leather-bound journal, and most importantly, delicate brass key that gleamed in the moonlight as if aware of its own significance. Julian held the key up to the window, letting the light shimmer through it. He could feel the connection to the letter, to the drawer, to something larger than himself. It was a puzzle, a sequence of discoveries, each one guiding him deeper into the house's secrets. The first letter had promised patience, listening, and attention to small details. Julian now understood why. The words of these letters were not simply instructions, they were gateways, subtle invitations to observe the ordinary until it revealed the extraordinary. That night, he returned to the letter. As he watched under the moonlight, the ink on the paper shifted again. Lines he hadn't noticed before appeared between the cursive letters, forming riddles that were invisible by day. Seek the place where water sleeps, but dreams are awake. Julian's brow furrowed. Water slept in the house, perhaps the fountain in the garden, or maybe the small basin in his grandmother's washroom. The letters did not provide answers, only direction. nudging him to explore, to think, to notice what had once been overlooked. Over the following nights, a rhythm formed. Each evening, as the clock neared midnight, Julian would return to the drawer. A new letter awaited him, each one subtly different, yet unmistakably the same in tone and handwriting. By day, the letters seemed like ordinary correspondences, their ink faded, the lines innocuous. But under the moonlight, the hidden words would reveal themselves, forming riddles, hints, and puzzles. The effect was almost magical, though Julian knew it was more than simple illusion. It was as if the letters themselves were aware of him, shaping their secrets to suit his perception, waiting for him to become the one who could listen. One night, the letter contained a more direct instruction. The mirror that does not reflect must guide your hand. Julian pondered this for a long time, pacing the attic. Mirrors that did not reflect were not common. But then he remembered a small hand mirror, silver-framed and cracked, stored in a forgotten corner beneath a pile of linens. He retrieved it, holding it carefully under the moonlight. The surface seemed dull, as though coated with a thin film, reflecting little more than his own blurred face. He followed the instructions from the letter, turning the mirror over, inspecting the back. There, faintly etched into the metal, was a symbol, a crescent moon, cradling a star. Julian traced it with his fingertip and pressed it lightly. With a soft click, a hidden compartment at the base of the mirror opened, revealing a tiny folded note. He unfolded it, heart hammering, and read the brief message written in the same flowing script. Well done. You notice what others overlook. Now follow the light of the night to where stories are kept in silence. Julian's mind raced. Stories kept in silence. Could it be the old bookcase tucked into the corner of the attic? He moved quickly, guided by instinct, and ran his fingers along the spines of dusty tomes. One book, thinner than the rest, felt lighter when he lifted it. Opening it carefully, he discovered that the pages were blank. But as he held it beneath the moonlight, ink appeared, shimmering like liquid silver. A new message: every discovery has a shadow. Every shadow holds a secret. Listen closely to the house, and you will learn where the next key lies. Julian realized that the letters were not just delivering clues, they were teaching him to see the unseen, to listen to the subtle movements of the house, the wind brushing against the window panes, the creak of a loose floorboard. Even the faint scent of old paper roll had become part of the puzzle. The attic, once silent and lifeless, had become alive with whispers, with movement, with hidden signals meant only for him. As the nights passed, the complexity of the letters increased. One contained a simple sketch of a spiral, faint lines twisting inward toward a tiny dot. Under moonlight, the drawing revealed itself to be a map of the attic, with small annotations marking places to explore, compartments to press, or objects to observe. Another letter hinted at a hidden staircase, long covered by a rug that descended into a forgotten cellar. Julian began to see that the house itself was a living archive, designed to protect knowledge and stories across generations. He spent hours each night decoding these messages, guided by moonlight and intuition. Sometimes the letters hinted at historical artifacts, sometimes at personal memories encoded in objects. He discovered small wooden boxes containing old photographs, journals filled with half-finished stories, and letters addressed to people he had never heard of. Each discovery was like a thread, pulling him deeper into the tapestry of the house's secrets. One night, a letter instructed him to climb to the highest point of the attic, where the moonlight struck a particular beam. There, he was to place his hand on a carved Symbiola crescent moon, surrounded by swirling lines. Julian obeyed, and as his fingers pressed the wood, a panel slid open silently, revealing a miniature drawer. Inside was another letter, folded carefully, the ink glowing faintly in the silver light. The journey is not in speed, but in attention. Do not rush. The world outside will try to claim your focus, but here, in the moonlight, you will find the truths hidden in plain sight. Julian folded the letter with reverence, realizing that the writer was not merely guiding him, they were teaching him. Each puzzle, each riddle, each hidden compartment was a lesson in perception, patience, and the art of noticing. He began to feel that the house, the letters, even the moonlight itself were collaborators in this strange nocturnal education. By now, Julian had grown accustomed to the rhythm of discovery. The ordinary world of daytime seemed distant, almost unreal. His friends and schoolwork faded to the background as the attic and its mysteries consumed his nights. Yet he was careful. He did not speak of the letters, nor of the drawer. Their secrets were too fragile to share. He had learned to move with quiet reverence, to touch objects as if they were living things, and to watch shadows as if they contained the pulse of stories waiting to be revealed. The letters themselves had begun to change in tone. Early on, they had been enigmatic and instructional. Now, they sometimes contained reflections, philosophical musings, and poetic hints about life, memory, and time. One letter read, "What is lost is never truly gone. It waits, patient, in places overlooked, in corners ignored, in moments we pass too quickly. The moonlight reveals what daylight conceals, and only those who are willing to listen may uncover it." Julian felt the words resonate within him. It was as though the house, the letters, and the moonlight were guiding him not only to hidden objects, but to a new way of seeing the world. The ordinary details of life, creaking floorboards, whispering winds, the scent of old paper had become extraordinary. Each night was a lesson, each letter a teacher, each shadow a story waiting to be discovered. As the chapter of the night drew on, Julian realized that the moonlight had become more than illumination. It was revelation. By its glow, ink shifted, secrets revealed themselves, and ordinary objects transformed into puzzles and guides. He felt that he was being prepared for something greater, a journey that would stretch beyond the attic, beyond the house, perhaps even beyond the world he had always known. He returned the latest letter to the drawer, carefully aligning it with the others. The drawer, once a simple obstacle, had become a sacred repository, a vessel through which the past spoke to the present, and the unseen whispered to those willing to listen. Julian knew that as long as moonlight touched the attic, he would follow the letters, decipher their riddles, and explore the hidden corners of his family's home. And so, night after night, the messages in moonlight continued, shaping him, guiding him, awakening a curiosity and attention he had never known. Julian understood, at last, that the journey was not merely about letters or riddles. It was about learning to listen, to perceive, and to uncover the extraordinary in the ordinary, one secret at a time. The boy in the letters. The attic had grown familiar to Julian, but with each passing night, it revealed new layers of mystery. By now, he had learned to move with quiet reverence among the trunks and dusty shelves, his eyes constantly scanning for shadows that might hide secrets, his ears tuned to the subtle whispers of the house. The letters in the drawer had become a nightly ritual, each one a delicate thread leading him further into a story that was not his own, yet somehow intimately connected to him. It was on a particularly still night, when the moon hung full and low over the garden, that Julian discovered the next letter. The drawer slid open with its usual soft creak, and he lifted the envelope, feeling a thrill of anticipation ripple through him. The handwriting, as always, was flowing, elegant, deliberate, yet this time it seemed to pulse with a new urgency. To the one who listens, it read, unchanged in form, yet the words carried a weight he had not noticed before. He untied the crimson ribbon and unfolded the paper, the familiar rustle sounding almost like a whisper in the quiet attic at first. The words seemed ordinary, almost conversational, like a diary entry. I was alone in this house. The walls were high, the floors creaked beneath me, and the nights felt endless. I would hide in corners, listening to the sounds of things that moved when no one was near. I was small, often afraid, and there was no one to tell my secrets to. The moon became my companion, its light a gentle guide in the dark. Julian's chest tightened. He recognized the sentiment instantly, the quiet, persistent loneliness of someone navigating a house full of history, but no companionship. The same feeling he had often carried in the corners of his own mind. The letter continued. I wrote letters, though I had no one to send them to. I addressed them to the one who listens, hoping, somehow, that someone would find them, that someone might understand the thoughts I could not speak aloud. I imagined a hand, warm and steady, opening the drawer and reading my words under the silver light of the moon. Julian's fingers tightened around the paper. The boy's words mirrored his own thoughts and feelings so precisely that it was unsettling. Every sleepless night, every moment of uncertainty and quiet longing seemed to echo in these letters. though they had been written long before he was born. It was as if the letters had been waiting not just for discovery, but for him. He read on, and a portrait of the boy's life began to emerge. A life marked by solitude, by small victories in otherwise quiet days, by whispered dreams no one else could hear. I found solace in the small things, a loose floorboard I could hide under, a bird that perched outside my window at dawn, the soft smell of old paper in the attic. I imagined conversations with the wind, and sometimes, when the house was especially still, I felt as though the walls themselves might answer. But the answers were always quiet, always fleeting, and I learned to cherish them even so. Julian paused. He could almost see the boy in the moonlight, the small figure crouched in the attic, tracing his fingers along polished wood, listening intently to sounds others ignored. He could see the intensity of longing in the boy's eyes, the fragile hope that someone, someday, would read these words and understand. I feared being forgotten. I feared the silence would become absolute, that my thoughts and my feelings would vanish into the dust, leaving no trace of me at all. So I wrote them down. I wrote them in letters, in journals, in the margins of books, in corners where only moonlight could reach. Perhaps this was foolish. Perhaps no one would ever find them. But still, I wrote, and still, I hoped. Julian felt a lump form in his throat. The boy's words were more than a story. They were a bridge between time and experience, the loneliness and hope, the small, quiet acts of courage, the careful observation of a world that often ignored him. They were reflections of Julian's own heart. He realized that the letters were not simply recounting history. They were inviting him to inhabit it, to understand, to connect across decades. As he read further, the boy's voice became more vivid, almost as though it were speaking to him directly in the attic. Sometimes I would imagine someone else reading these words, someone who would understand the quiet longing in my heart, the ache of nights spent listening to things that moved when no one else was near. I imagined their hands, gentle and careful, turning each page, finding meaning in the spaces between lines. And when I imagined this, I no longer felt so alone. Julian's pulse quickened. The idea that the boy had imagined him, though he did not yet exist, was almost too strange to comprehend. Yet he felt it unmistakably, as though the attic itself were affirming the connection. The shadows seemed to lean closer, the moonlight sharpened, and the air seemed charged with the energy of recognition. I wished I could speak aloud, but words often failed me. My fears were too large, my thoughts too small, and the world outside too busy to listen. So I wrote. I wrote for the moon, for the walls, for anyone who might someday care to hear. And now, perhaps, that someone has come. Julian pressed the letter to his chest, feeling a sudden warmth that had nothing to do with the air in the attic. It was as though the boy's presence had entered the room with him, as though the silence itself had transformed into companionship. The loneliness that had hung in the shadows now felt less absolute. He was not alone. The boy's voice, trapped in ink and paper, had found him. The letter continued with small, vivid details of the boy's life in the house. I remember the old fountain in the garden, how the water would shimmer in the moonlight. I remember the cracked tiles in the hallway, where I would sit for hours, imagining journeys I could not yet take. I remember the attic, high and silent, where I kept my letters and my dreams, waiting for someone who would understand. Sometimes I feared they would never be found, that my life would dissolve into shadows. But still I hoped, and still I wrote. Julian's gaze drifted toward the moonlit window. Outside, the garden was bathed in silver, and he could see the fountain glinting in the shadows. He felt a strange kinship with the boy, as if the spaces he had once overlooked, the corner of a room, the curve of a staircase, the silent flutter of the trees, had been preserved for him to explore. The house itself seemed alive, holding the echoes of the boy's footsteps, his laughter, his whispered fears. "Do not think me weak," the letter read, "for I have endured nights filled with fear and uncertainty. But it is the fear that sharpened my senses, that taught me to listen, to notice, to understand the hidden layers of this world. And now, perhaps, it will guide someone else." Julian understood. The boy's letters were not merely a reflection of loneliness. They were instructions, a guide for navigating the quiet, subtle mysteries of the house. Every detail mattered. The way shadows moved, the way moonlight caught the edges of objects, the almost imperceptible sounds of life hidden within walls. The letters were a map of perception, and Julian had become their apprentice. He turned the letter over and found a final note, written in slightly smaller script, as though meant to be read in the silence of the night. "I have lived in these pages, in these letters, waiting for the one who would listen. You are that one. Treat what you find with care, learn from it, and know that, in doing so, you honor the life I have left behind, the hopes I could not voice aloud, and the quiet courage of nights spent in solitude." Julian folded the letter carefully and returned it to the drawer. But he could not stop thinking about the boy. The attic, once a collection of dusty objects and shadows, had transformed into a vessel of memory and presence. Every object, every shadow, every whisper of wind seemed imbued with the boy's experience. He felt connected to a lifelong past, yet eerily present, as if time itself had bent to allow their spirits to meet. That night, he lingered longer than usual in the attic. He traced his fingers along the edges of the desk, along the carved swirls in the wood, as if touching the past could bridge the distance between him and the boy. He imagined the boy sitting in the corner, pen in hand, moonlight glinting off the window, imagining someone like Julian would one day read his words. The thought filled Julian with a deep sense of responsibility, a quiet reverence for the fragile bridge that had formed between them. As he finally left the attic and descended the narrow staircase, Julian felt that something fundamental had shifted. The letters were no longer just mysterious riddles. They were the voice of someone who had once walked these halls, felt these shadows, and hoped for understanding. And now, he was the one who had come to listen. Outside, the moon had begun its descent, casting long silver streaks across the garden. Julian paused for a moment at the window, looking out at the fountain, the tiles, the trees that whispered in the night. He understood, with a sudden clarity, that the house was alive, not only in bricks and beams, but in memory, hope, and the quiet courage of those who had once called it home. And in that moment, Julian realized that his own story was now intertwined with the boys. Through the letters, he had inherited not only the mysteries of the house, but a companion across time, a presence that would guide him, challenge him, and mirror his own hopes and fears in the quiet hours of the night. The unfinished task. The attic had never felt so heavy. Julian's footsteps echoed softly against the wooden floorboards, each creak amplifying the sense that the house itself was holding its breath. The letters, once delicate invitations to explore the house's hidden corners, had begun to take on a more urgent tone. There was a pattern emerging, subtle but unmistakable. The boy's words were guiding him toward something unfinished, a task left incomplete long before Julian had even existed. He approached the desk with reverence, the crimson ribbon of the latest letter glinting faintly in the moonlight. He lifted the envelope and read the familiar inscription, "To the one who listens." Julian's pulse quickened. The words inside were more somber than previous letters, the handwriting more deliberate, each curve and line etched with careful intensity. He untied the ribbon and unfolded the paper, letting the rustling sound echo gently in the attic's silence. "I began a task," the letter began, "one I could not complete. There were promises I made to myself, to the house, and to the world I could not yet reach. They remain unfinished, lingering like shadows in the corners of these rooms, waiting for a hand willing to see them through. You are that hand." Julian frowned, the weight of the words pressing down on him. What promise could remain so important that it echoed across decades? He could feel the urgency radiating from the paper, a quiet insistence that demanded attention and care. "I hid truths in these walls, in the folds of letters, in compartments that only the attentive would find. I feared my time would end before they could be revealed, and that they would vanish into obscurity. But if you are reading this, it means the world has given me another chance, and you are the one it has chosen to carry it forward." The sense of responsibility settled over Julian like a physical weight. He had been drawn into the house's mysteries through curiosity and wonder. But now, the letters demanded more than exploration. They demanded action. The unfinished task was not simply a puzzle. It was a moral and emotional charge, a call to honor a life interrupted, and a promise left unfulfilled. Julian moved slowly through the attic, letting the letter guide his eyes over familiar objects. Dusty trunks, stacks of books, and scattered papers all seemed to hold hidden significance now. He felt the subtle energy of the house, as if it, too, were aware that something crucial was at stake. The task is simple in concept, but complex in execution, the letter continued. It is not enough to find objects or solve riddles. You must understand, preserve, and complete. The boy who once lived here left behind pieces of himself in every corner. He left messages that only the truly attentive could interpret. You must read them all, understand them all, and place them in their rightful order. Only then will the promise be fulfilled. Julian's mind raced. He had followed the letters, discovered hidden compartments, and deciphered riddles. Yet he had not realized the full scope of what the boy had intended. The letters were not mere puzzles. They were fragments of a life, a series of intentions and dreams, small and delicate acts of hope that needed to be acknowledged and completed. He returned to the desk and opened a small, previously unnoticed drawer. Inside was a collection of folded papers, sketches, and tiny trinkets. Each item seemed ordinary at first glance, yet under moonlight, the ink shimmered and revealed annotations, instructions, and reflections left by the boy. Julian realized that each fragment was part of the unfinished task. Every note, every drawing, every folded paper was a piece of a puzzle that demanded not just observation, but interpretation and care. Some fragments are physical, some are emotional, and some are moral, the letter warned. You will need patience, empathy, and courage. The house will test you as it tested me. The shadows may mislead you, the silence may frustrate you, and the objects may appear trivial, but everything matters. Nothing is as it seems, and everything is connected. Julian carefully unfolded one of the papers. It contained the sketch of the attic as it had appeared decades ago, with a small, meticulously drawn figure of the boy sitting in the corner, pen in hand. Lines connected certain objects, a small mirror, a wooden box, the edge of a trunk. Notes in tiny, looping script indicated places to explore, actions to take, and observations to make. Each note carried both instruction and emotion, a reflection of the boy's personality, fears, and hopes. I left pieces of myself everywhere, the letter continued, so that someone might understand not only the world I inhabited, but the inner world I could not speak aloud. Every piece has meaning, and only by gathering them together will you comprehend the full story. Only then can the task be complete. Julian's heart raced. He began to understand that the boy's life had been a quiet, intricate dance of observation, hope, and subtle action. Each fragment left behind was not merely a keepsake, but a living component of a story that demanded resolution. Julian felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He was no longer a passive observer. He had been chosen to finish what the boy could not. He spent the next hours retracing steps he had taken in previous nights, revisiting corners of the attic, examining trunks, mirrors, and shelves with renewed focus. Each discovery seemed to resonate with the letter's guidance. A small wooden box that he had thought empty revealed a folded note when pressed in just the right way. A photograph tucked into an old journal held a hidden annotation on the back. A ribbon tied around a forgotten book contained another cryptic instruction, guiding him to an overlooked compartment beneath the floorboards. As Julian pieced together each fragment, he began to see a pattern emerging, not merely a map of objects, but a map of experiences, emotions, and intentions. The boy had been meticulous, deliberate, and patient, yet even he had reached the limits of what he could accomplish in his lifetime. Julian now realized that the unfinished task was as much about understanding the boy's inner life as it was about arranging objects or deciphering riddles. "You must become my witness," the letter read, "not just to the objects I left, but to the life I lived, the choices I made, and the hopes I carried silently. Only by witnessing can you honor what was incomplete. Only by understanding can you fulfill the promise. The world may not notice, and the house may remain silent, but your role is crucial. You are chosen not by me, but by the currents of time and memory themselves." Julian's hands trembled. The task was overwhelming in its scope, yet he felt a deep, unshakable certainty. He had been chosen for this, not by chance, but by some intricate weaving of history and fate. The letters, the objects, the moonlight, all had guided him to this moment. He realized that the boy's unfinished task was no longer just the boy's. It had become his own. The night deepened, and Julian worked tirelessly, guided by the letters and by instinct. He carefully arranged the objects he discovered, followed the instructions hidden in sketches and notes, and interpreted the subtle emotional cues embedded in the boy's words. Each action felt like a conversation across time, each discovery a confirmation that he was on the right path. Hours passed, and as the first hints of dawn crept into the attic, Julian finally laid out the last fragment of small, folded paper that had remained hidden beneath the floorboards, its message faint and almost invisible in the dim light. He unfolded it and read the final instructions, written in the same flowing script place, the fragments together, not just in physical alignment, but in understanding. See the life I lived, hear the hopes I carried, feel the fears I endured. Only then will the unfinished task be complete, and only then will the promise I made be fulfilled. The world outside may never know, but you will, and that is enough. Julian took a deep breath. Slowly, carefully, he began to arrange the fragments, guided by intuition, memory, and the faint resonance of the boy's presence. The pieces came together like notes in a symphony, each one adding depth and texture to the story that had waited decades for resolution. The sketches, letters, photographs, and trinkets now formed a coherent narrative of life, once fragmented, now whole through Julian's careful attention. As he placed the final piece, Julian felt a subtle shift in the attic. The shadows softened, the moonlight seemed warmer, and a gentle, almost imperceptible sigh filled the space, as if the house itself had exhaled. He knew, without doubt, that the unfinished task had been completed, not in the way the boy had imagined, perhaps, but in a way that honored the intent, the hope, and the life embedded in every fragment. The letters had been more than puzzles, more than riddles. They had been a bridge across time, a way for one life to reach another, for a promise left incomplete to find fulfillment. Julian felt a profound connection to the boy, a sense of shared understanding and compassion that transcended decades. He had become the listener, the witness, the one who carried the task to its conclusion. And as he carefully returned the last fragment to the drawer, arranging the letters with meticulous care, Julian realized something extraordinary. The boy's presence, once palpable in shadows and words, now felt at peace. The attic, heavy with history and memory, seemed to hum with quiet satisfaction. The promise had been honored, the task completed, and a bridge between past and present had been firmly established. Julian leaned back against the desk, his heart full of awe and quiet triumph. The journey had been long, the path uncertain, but he had fulfilled the role he had been chosen for. The unfinished task, once a weight of history and mystery, had transformed into a testament of attention, empathy, and perseverance. Outside, the first light of dawn spilled into the attic, brushing the walls with soft gold. Julian knew that the house, the letters, and the boy's life had changed him forever. He had discovered not only the mysteries of the attic, but the power of listening, the depth of human experience, and the quiet significance of honoring promises that span time. The final midnight letter. The attic was silent, yet alive. Moonlight streamed through the round window, spilling across the dusty floorboards, glancing off the edges of trunks and shelves, and illuminating the desk that had become Julian's sanctuary over the past nights. He had grown accustomed to the gentle creaks of the house, the subtle whisper of wind through the eaves, and the quiet scent of old paper and polished wood. But tonight felt different. Tonight held a weight that neither curiosity nor routine could explain, a sense that something was coming to its natural conclusion. The drawer at the center of the desk had always responded to him with a soft creak, a musical signal that a new letter awaited. Tonight, Julian approached with reverence, as if stepping into the final chapter of a story that had unfolded not only in the attic, but within his own heart. He lifted the drawer carefully. Inside lay a single envelope, tied with the familiar crimson ribbon. Its paper seemed slightly more fragile, more luminous under the moonlight, as though it carried the culmination of decades of quiet hopes, unspoken words, and patient waiting. The inscription read, "As always, to the one who listens." Julian's fingers trembled as he untied the ribbon. The envelope slipped open easily, the rustle of the paper soft in the hushed attic. He unfolded the letter, and the handwriting, deliberate, imbued with quiet dignity, greeted him like an old friend. "You have arrived at the end of the journey I began, the one I could not complete myself. 4 nights beyond count, I waited for someone who could hear, someone who could carry forward the stories I left behind. You are that one. And in finding these words, in following the fragments, you have fulfilled what I could not." Julian's chest tightened. The boy's words, once whispers across time, now felt like a gentle hand on his shoulder, guiding him toward understanding and closure. "I am grateful," the letter continued, "that you have listened, not just with your eyes, but with your heart. You saw beyond the objects, the riddles, the letters. You understood that the life I lived, though quiet and hidden, had meaning. And in your attention, my story has been acknowledged, honored, and preserved." The weight of responsibility he had carried over the past nights, the urgency, the mystery, the thrill of discovery seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a profound sense of calm. Julian realized that the task had never been merely about puzzles or objects. It had been about empathy, patience, and the act of bearing witness. "Stories are fragile," the letter went on. "They live only when someone carries them forward. Objects gather dust, words fade, and memories dim. But when a story finds a listener, it breathes, it grows, it endures. You have become my listener, and in doing so, you have ensured that the life I lived, the hopes I carried, and the moments I cherished will continue to exist." Julian's eyes moved across the paper, absorbing the boy's reflections, the quiet acknowledgement of his own role in the narrative. The attic, once merely a repository of objects and shadows, had transformed into a living testament to connection, to understanding, and to the endurance of memory. He traced the words with his finger, as if touching the paper could bridge the decades that separated them. The boy's presence felt tangible, like a soft pulse of energy in the moonlit air. A companion who had walked beside him in silence through every night of discovery. "There is one final task, though it is not mine to complete," the letter continued. "You must take what you have learned, what you have uncovered, and carry it beyond this house. Let the story breathe in the world outside. Share it, cherish it, or simply remember it, but do not let it vanish again. In this, the unfinished task becomes complete, and the promise I made is fulfilled." Julian felt a profound resonance in those words. The journey had been confined to the attic, to moonlight, to whispers and shadows, yet its meaning reached far beyond the walls. He understood now that the boy's life, though once solitary and hidden, had created a chain of connection, a bond that linked past to present, the silent to the attentive, memory to living experience. He looked around the attic one last time, seeing not just objects, but lives embedded in each corner, the carved desks, the folded letters, the old trunks, each containing traces of stories, emotions, and quiet courage. Julian realized that he had become a part of this continuum. He was both listener and participant, bridging decades of silence with a single, attentive presence. "Do not grieve for me," the letter said, softly, as if anticipating Julian's own emotions. "I am here in every line, in every shadow, in every fragment, and now, through you, I am carried forward. Remember that the quiet, patient acts of attention matter more than the loud declarations of the world. In noticing, in preserving, you have honored life itself." A soft sigh, almost imperceptible, seemed to echo from the walls, a sound of release, of something long held, finally set free. Julian folded the letter with care, feeling as if he were holding not just paper, but the accumulated hopes, fears, and small triumphs of someone who had lived, waited, and finally been understood. He returned the letter to the drawer. The soft creak of the wood as it closed for the last time seemed almost ceremonial, marking the end of a journey that had begun with curiosity and mystery and ended with understanding and belonging. Julian pressed the drawer gently, feeling the permanence of its closure. The letters, the objects, the tasks, they were now complete. For a long moment, Julian sat in the moonlit attic, breathing deeply, letting the quiet wash over him. He felt the weight of absence and presence, of history and memory, settling into a profound equilibrium. The boy's story was no longer just a series of letters and hidden objects. It was alive within Julian, carried forward by his understanding, empathy, and care. Outside, the moonlight softened, the edges of shadows blurring into the first hints of dawn. Julian rose and moved toward the window, gazing out at the garden where the fountain shimmered, the trees whispered, and the world waited quietly for another day. He realized that the attic's mysteries had transformed him not merely by revealing a past life, but by teaching him how to listen, how to perceive, and how to honor what often goes unnoticed. "You have done more than follow instructions," the final lines of the letter seemed to whisper, even in the quiet room. "You have carried a story, and in doing so, you have become part of it. The house, the letters, and I are now bound to you, just as you are bound to the understanding you have earned. Take courage, take belonging, take the story. It is yours now." Julian felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, not of sadness, but of completion, of connection, of the extraordinary weight of witnessing a life that had once been invisible. He tucked the letter into his pocket, feeling its warmth, its permanence, its affirmation. The drawer would never open again, but the story had moved beyond the confines of wood and paper. It now lived within him, carried forward by memory, attention, and heart. He stepped down from the attic, moving slowly along the narrow staircase, letting each creak and whisper remind him of the nights spent in moonlight, decoding riddles, following shadows, and piecing together a life. The house, once secretive and solemn, seemed to breathe around him, acknowledging the completion of the task, the fulfillment of a promise, and the quiet triumph of understanding. As Julian opened the front door and stepped into the world beyond the house, he carried with him more than letters and memories. He carried courage, the courage to listen, to observe, and to act with care. He carried belonging, a profound sense of connection to a lifelong past. to a presence that had shaped his nights and awakened his awareness. And he carried a story, now his own, yet forever entwined with the boy who had lived, waited, and hoped. The dawn spread across the garden, brushing gold across the fountain, the tiles, and the trees. Julian paused, taking it in. House behind him was quiet, the drawer sealed, the letters complete. Yet he knew that the attic's lessons, the boy's presence, and the journey of attention would remain within him forever. The world outside awaited, but he was no longer the same boy who had entered the attic days ago. He was a listener, a witness, a bearer of stories, and in that role, he felt an unshakable sense of purpose and peace. He whispered softly, as if addressing the shadows themselves, "Thank you for trusting me, for waiting, for speaking in silence." And with that, Julian stepped fully into the morning, carrying the past, the stories, and the quiet wisdom of moonlit nights into the unfolding day. The drawer would remain closed, the letters would remain sealed, but their life had moved forward, live in him, alive in the act of listening, alive in the courage to remember, honor, and share. The boy's story, once incomplete and hidden, had been finished not by his hand alone, but through the attentive heart of someone willing to bear witness. And in doing so, Julian had discovered that stories, like courage and connection, endure only when someone chooses to carry them forward. The attic, the house, and the moonlit letters had given him a gift beyond measure. The knowledge that the quiet acts of listening, noticing, and understanding are the truest forms of magic in the world. And with that gift, Julian moved forward, carrying the story not as an obligation, but as a part of who he had become. And so ends tonight's story. The drawer may be closed, but its whispers remain with us, carried forward in memory. Thank you for joining me here at Whispers of the Night. May your dreams be gentle, your rest deep, and your heart light.